not that long ago, there were tens of thousands of mainly men who knew how to make hedges like this. And they did it because they needed to keep the stock separate. The sheep separate from the pigs, separate from the cattle, separate from the horses, and different flocks separate, because they didn't want their flock mixing with their neighbour's flock. So men knew how to do this. They knew how to bend a tree over and create a lip where it joined to the rootstock, and do it in such a way that it worked to keep the stock in its enclosure. And each county, each district, each town had its own method, and it depended on the trees that were available, the sort of soil that was there, and some of them created banks, others just bent the trees straight over, others did a loose clump like this, which is perfectly serviceable, others were dead straight with support posts. It was incredibly variable, and there were thousands of people that could do it. A number of things encouraged this trade. Enclosures Act certainly increased the number of hedges that were needed. The Industrial Revolution reduced the number of men that were available to do it, because many of them moved to the towns. The First World War killed off many of the men who knew how to do it, and the Second World War did even more. And as the number of people in the countryside declined, there were fewer people to do it. So now when you try to find someone who's really good at hedging, there are very, very, very few of them. And some of them produce the most wonderful works of art that could almost be good enough to be in a museum, but they are actually extremely good for wildlife. They serve as wildlife corridors, they're great places for nesting. If it's not done, what eventually happens is either the top is cut off and the hedge is eventually truncated in that way and loses its vigour and starts to fall to pieces, or what eventually happens is one or two of the trees start to grow taller and the branches actually get taller, they shade out the others, so it stops being a hedge and ends up being a line of trees, and the line of trees can become just a sparsely dotted series of trees across a landscape, and they eventually can be lost completely, so there is no hedge there. So we don't need to keep stock separate so often these days, because we use barbed wire fences and wire. But in some parts of the country, they look wonderfully attractive, they're useful for wildlife,